The woman who bent an empire. A true story of Hurrem Sultan and Suleiman the Magnificent. Part 1. In 1520, a teenage girl was dragged out of her burning village in what is now Ukraine. Stripped of her name, loaded onto a cart, and sold. She arrived in Constantinople as property. She left history as the most powerful woman the Ottoman Empire ever produced. And the man who handed her that power was the same man who commanded armies stretching from Budapest to Baghdad, Sultan Suleiman I, the man the West called the Magnificent. He didn't give her power because he was weak. He gave it because he was completely, irrevocably against every tradition and law of his world in love. This is a story about what love does to power, what power does to love, and what one woman, born nobody, renamed Hurrem, meaning the laughing one, did with both. She didn't just survive a cage. She redesigned it into a throne. Part 2. The world she entered. Now, let the listener picture it. To understand what Hurrem walked into, you need to understand the harem, not the fantasy version painted by European artists who'd never been within 1,000 miles of it, but the real thing. The Imperial Harem of Topkapi Palace was a city within a city. At its peak, it housed over 1,000 women. They were organized by rank, by skill, by the Sultan's attention. And that attention was the only currency that mattered. The rules were absolute and ancient. A concubine who bore the Sultan a son received status. One who bore multiple sons received jealousy and danger. The mother of the eventual Sultan became the Valide Sultan, the Queen Mother, the most powerful woman in the empire. But the road to that throne ran through betrayal, poison, and decades of calculation. There was one more rule, older than the palace walls themselves. A sultan never married a concubine. Never. To do so would be political madness, a gift to every enemy who wanted to paint him as weak, distracted, ruled by a slave woman. Suleiman married Hurrem anyway. He was the first Ottoman Sultan in history to do so. He would be the last. Part 3. How it began. Her original name was Alexandra, or possibly Anastasia. Historians still debate it. She was born around 1502 in Rohatyn, a town in what is now western Ukraine. Her father was likely a Ruthenian Orthodox priest. In 1520, Crimean Tatar raiders hit the town. They took her with them. She was sold at the slave market in Kaffa, the largest human trafficking hub of the medieval world, and eventually reached Constantinople, where she entered the Imperial Harem as a gift. She was, by Ottoman records, small, red-haired, not considered a conventional beauty by the standards of the court. But she had something the other women didn't. She laughed. Not the performed, careful, calculated laughter of a woman managing men. She laughed with her whole self, openly, freely, in a place that ran on fear. And in a palace built on ritual and silence, that sound was revolutionary. The women called her Hurrem. Suleiman called her that too. Then he called her something no sultan had ever called a concubine before. He called her Haseki, beloved, a title he invented for her. Part 4. The Letters. Suleiman was, among everything else, a poet. He wrote under the pen name Muhibi, meaning the affectionate one. And he wrote to Hurrem the way a man writes when language is the only thing that can hold what he's feeling. His verses describe her as my springtime, my merry-faced love, my daytime, my sweetheart, laughing leaf, my woman of the beautiful hair, my love of the slanted brow, my love of eyes full of mischief. That is the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, commander of the most formidable military force on earth, writing love poetry to a woman born in a village he'd never heard of, that no longer exists. And she wrote back. Her letters survive. They are not the letters of a woman playing a role. They are sharp, warm, politically aware, and filled with something even rarer than beauty. A personality that refused to be erased. Part 5. The Rivals and the Stakes. Hurrem's ascent had enemies. Of course it did. The most formidable was Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's Grand Vizier, his closest friend since childhood, the man who had the Sultan's ear before Hurrem had his heart. Ibrahim was brilliant, arrogant, and certain that his position was unassailable. He'd married Suleiman's sister. He ran the empire's day-to-day operations. He called himself Ibrahim Pasha Makbul, the beloved, and believed it. Then there was Mahidevran, the previous favorite concubine, mother of Suleiman's eldest son, Mustafa, a woman who had every historical and legal reason to believe she was the most important woman in the harem. Historical accounts, Ottoman records, Venetian ambassador dispatches describe a physical confrontation between Mahidevran and Hurrem. Mahidevran reportedly had Hurrem beaten and scratched until she bled. When Suleiman sent for Hurrem afterward, she refused to go to him until the injuries had healed. Not because she was hiding, because she was making a statement. When she finally appeared before Suleiman, she told him calmly what had been done to her, and by whom. Mahidevran never regained her position. Ibrahim Pasha was strangled by the Sultan's own men in 1536 in a guest room of the palace where Suleiman had housed him as an honored guest. The order came after Hurrem had spent years documenting his abuses, his arrogance, his dangerous independence to anyone who would listen. She listened. She documented. She waited. Let that settle. Then continue. Hurrem was not cruel, but she understood the game she was inside, and she played it with a precision that historians are still mapping. Part 6. The Marriage That Broke History. Sometime between 1531 and 1534, the exact date is still disputed, Suleiman did something no Ottoman Sultan before or since would do. He freed Hurrem from slavery. Then, he married her, legally, formally, with a religious ceremony, with witnesses, with celebration in the streets of Constantinople. The city was in shock. European ambassadors sent frantic reports home. The Venetian dispatch called it a scandal without precedent. Ottoman traditionalists were furious. Jurists scrambled to find legal grounds to object. Suleiman did not explain himself. He didn't have to. He was Suleiman. His word was the law. His decree was scripture. His empire was the greatest military power on the planet. And he wanted Hurrem. Not as a concubine. Not as a favorite. Not as property. As his wife. Part 7. What she built. Marriage gave Hurrem legal standing, but Hurrem gave herself power. She built institutions, the Haseki Sultan complex, mosques, a school, a hospital, a soup kitchen feeding the poor, still stands in Istanbul today. She built it. She funded it. She commissioned it. She maintained a diplomatic correspondence with foreign rulers, Polish kings, Persian shahs, under her own name, not through Suleiman. She moved the harem from the old palace to Topkapi, physically relocating the center of female power inside the empire to the center of imperial power itself. And she did something no woman in Ottoman history had ever done. She remained. When Suleiman went on campaign to Vienna, to Persia, to Rhodes, Hurrem stayed in Constantinople as his eyes, his ears, his political intelligence network. He wrote to her daily when he was away. She wrote back with information, analysis, observations, and love. She was, in every practical sense, governing the empire while he was away fighting for it.
Part 8. The Cost. Power always has a cost. In Hurrem's case, the cost was terrible. Mustafa was Suleiman's eldest son, tall, militarily brilliant, beloved by the Janissaries, the obvious heir. His mother was Mahidevran, Hurrem's oldest enemy. Hurrem had sons of her own, Selim, Bayezid, and others. If Mustafa took the throne, Ottoman succession law meant her children's lives were forfeit. Dead. All of them. This was not paranoia. This was Ottoman law. Fratricide at succession was legal, established, and routine. In 1553, Suleiman had Mustafa executed, strangled in the imperial tent, on campaign, by the Sultan's own command. The role Hurrem and her son-in-law Rustem Pasha played in bringing this about is one of history's most debated questions. Evidence suggests a letter, possibly forged, suggesting Mustafa was plotting treason. The Janissaries wept openly. The army nearly mutinied. Mahidevran was exiled and impoverished. Hurrem's sons were safe. History doesn't let us know what Hurrem felt about Mustafa's death. Her letters from this period don't survive, or were destroyed. What we have is silence, and the fact that she lived only 4 more years after it. Part 9. Her death. His grief. Hurrem Sultan died on April 15th, 1558. The cause was likely illness, possibly exhaustion, possibly something systemic that had been building for years. She was somewhere between 55 and 60 years old. She had outlived nearly every enemy she ever had. Suleiman did not go on campaign that year. He commissioned the greatest Ottoman architect of the age, Mimar Sinan, to build her a mausoleum inside the Suleymaniye mosque complex, the monument Suleiman had built to himself. He put her there, beside him, in death, as in life. He wrote poems about her absence, the way some men breathe, because not writing was impossible. One verse, translated roughly from Ottoman Turkish: "The world to me is empty without you." He lived 8 more years. He never remarried. He never took another favorite. He died in 1566, on campaign in Hungary, in a tent on a battlefield, still moving the empire forward at age 71. They buried him beside her. There is a version of this story where Hurrem is a villain, the manipulative slave who corrupted a great man, bent the Ottoman succession toward chaos, and triggered the long, slow fracture of an empire. European contemporaries wrote that version. They called her La Rosa, the Red One,
and painted her as a witch, a schemer, a foreign infection in the Ottoman bloodline. There is another version where she is a survivor, a woman who was taken, property, nothing, and built herself into something undeniable through intelligence, will, and the terrifying clarity of a person who knows exactly what the world is and refuses to accept the role it assigned her. Both versions contain truth. That's what makes her real. What is undeniable? What the Ottoman archives, the European dispatches, the archaeological record, and 5 centuries of scholarship agree on is this. A girl with no name, no family, no freedom, and no country walked into one of the most closed, hierarchical, brutal institutions in human history.
And she changed it. Not through magic, not through beauty alone, through the particular and devastating combination of a brilliant mind, an unbreakable will, and the love of a man powerful enough to let her. Her tomb still stands in Istanbul. If you go there now, you can stand a few feet from her bones. This woman who should have been forgotten the second she was sold at a market in 1520. Instead, 500 years later, you're listening to her story. She would have considered that entirely appropriate.